My son-in-law called me a handyman in front of 40 people. He said it the way you'd say it about someone who fixes toilets for a living, which is not an insult, except he meant it as one. His name is Preston. He married my daughter Vivienne 11 years ago, and in 11 years, I don't think he's ever once asked me a real question. Not what I do, not what I think, not how I'm holding up since her mother passed. Preston talks at people. He's good at it. He's a vice president at a commercial real estate firm in Atlanta, and he has the handshake of a man who practiced it in a mirror. I'm going to tell you what happened at his firm's anniversary gala in March, but first I need to tell you about the shirt. I own one tuxedo. I bought it in 1987 for a black tie dinner in Washington, and I've had it dry cleaned maybe a dozen times since. It still fits because I never stopped walking, 4 miles every morning, same route, same pace, rain or shine. The tuxedo is not impressive. It's not the kind of thing that gets you noticed at an event full of men who lease their wardrobes. But it's mine, and it's paid for, and I wore it the night everything changed. Vivienne called me 2 weeks before the gala. She said Preston's firm was celebrating 30 years, and they were inviting clients, partners, board members, the whole apparatus. She said there would be about 200 people, and that the venue was the Biltmore Ballroom in downtown Atlanta. "Dad," she said, "I want you there, but I need you to understand. Preston's colleagues are going to be there, important people. Please don't tell your stories about the mill." I said, "Which stories?" She said, "All of them." I said I understood, and I did. I've been a quiet man most of my life. I know how to sit at a table and eat my food and smile at the right moments. I learned that from my own father, who worked 41 years at a paper mill in Savannah and never once complained about being the least educated man in any room. He used to say, if they knew what you knew, they'd have your job. He meant it as comfort, but it took me 30 years to understand it was also a warning. I drove myself to Atlanta. Vivienne offered to send a car, but I said no. I still drive my 2009 Silverado. It's got 160,000 miles and a small dent on the rear panel from a parking garage in Chattanooga. I parked it on the street 2 blocks from the Biltmore because I didn't want it sitting in front of the hotel when Preston's colleagues were arriving in their leased Escalades. The ballroom was already full when I got there. Vivienne found me at the entrance and straightened my bow tie, which didn't need straightening. She was wearing a dark green dress, and she looked like her mother did in 1979, and I had to breathe through my nose for a moment. "You look wonderful," she said. "You look like your mother." She held my arm for a second longer than usual. Preston came over. He had a bourbon in his hand and the slightly too bright eyes of a man who's been networking since 4 in the afternoon. He shook my hand, the practiced handshake, and said, "Glad you could make it, Earl." He calls me Earl, never Dad, never Sir, just Earl, like we met on a golf course once and never advanced past acquaintances. He steered Vivienne away almost immediately. Something about someone he needed her to meet. I stood near the bar and ordered a club soda and watched the room. I should tell you something about myself that almost nobody at that gala knew. My name is Earl Hutchins. I'm 64 years old. I grew up in Jessup, Georgia, the son of a mill worker and a school secretary. I went to Georgia Southern on a partial academic scholarship and graduated in 1981 with a degree in civil engineering. I spent 12 years working for a mid-size infrastructure firm in Savannah. Bridges, water systems, drainage projects. The kind of work that holds a town together without anyone thanking you for it. In 1993, I started buying land. Not because I had a plan. I had a feeling. I'd spent over a decade surveying rural Georgia and watching where highways were quietly being approved and where population was slowly, almost invisibly, drifting. I bought 140 acres outside of Pooler, Georgia for $2,000 an acre. I bought a half-mile of floodplain along a county road outside of Rincon for almost nothing because nobody wanted floodplain. Then the port expansion happened. Then the industrial corridor followed. Then the distribution centers came in waves. I did not sell everything. I am not that kind of man. But I sold enough at the right time to change the denominator of the equation. And then I bought more, quietly, in places where I again had that feeling. Over 30 years, working with one accountant and one attorney, both of whom I've known since college, I built something I never gave a name to because naming it felt like tempting it. My net worth, as of the last time my accountant and I sat down together, is approximately $9 million. Maybe a little more now. I don't check it every day. It's not interesting to me the way the land itself is interesting. The particular way a piece of property sits in relation to a ridgeline, or the way water moves through a low-lying parcel after a hard rain. The money is just what the land becomes when you sell it. What I care about is the reading of it, looking at a map and knowing something other people don't know yet. Vivienne doesn't know the number. She knows I'm comfortable. She knows I don't worry about money. But I bought my house in Statesboro for cash in 2004, and she thought I got a mortgage like everyone else. And I didn't correct her. I've paid for her children's college funds quietly through a vehicle my attorney set up, so it looks like a trust from her mother's estate, which it partly is. Her mother knew. Her mother was the only one who knew everything. I kept the secret for the same reason my father kept his dignity at the mill, not because I was ashamed, but because I learned early that when people know what you have, they stop seeing what you are. The gala was going well enough. I ate my dinner, salmon, green beans, some kind of risotto that had been sitting too long, and made conversation with the couple next to me. The husband was a contractor from Marietta, pleasant enough, talked a lot about pickleball. His wife asked me what I did, and I said, property. She nodded and looked past me to see if there was someone more interesting to look at. That was fine. I've been looked past my whole life. You get used to it. Or rather, I found that you can use it the way a still pond is useful, because things settle to the bottom in the clear water and you can see them. Preston gave remarks. He was good at it. He thanked the firm's founders, acknowledged the team, named a few major clients. He was polished and confident, and I thought, watching him, that he would have been very unhappy in Jesup, Georgia, where the only audience that mattered was whether the corn came in or whether it didn't. After the remarks, the firm's managing partner, a man named Charles Fairfield, whom I'd never met, circulated through the room. He was 70, maybe 71, silver-haired, the kind of man who moves through a room slowly because he's learned that standing still makes people come to him. I watched him work the tables. He had a quietness about him that I recognized. It's the quietness of a man who doesn't need to say anything because he's already said everything that mattered years ago. He reached our side of the room. He shook hands with the pickleball contractor. He smiled at the contractor's wife. And then he looked at me. He stopped. He tilted his head the way you do when you're trying to place someone. I watched it happen. The almost recognition, then the recalibration, then the certainty. Earl, he said. Earl Hutchins. I said, Charles. He laughed. It was a real laugh, not a gala laugh. I'll be damned. How long has it been? Pooler, I said. 2006 or 2007. The water infrastructure meeting, 2007. The water infrastructure meeting, 2007, he said. Because my wife was pregnant with our youngest and she was furious, I was in Pooler instead of home. He shook my hand with both of his. You look exactly the same. You've got more gray, I said. I've earned all of it. He pulled up an empty chair from the next table and sat down across from me. He didn't ask permission. He was that kind of man. What are you doing here? Don't tell me you're one of Preston's clients. I said, he married my daughter. Charles Fairfield went still for exactly 1 second. Then he said, Preston Hale married Earl Hutchins's daughter. It wasn't a question. It was the sound of a man reorganizing information. I should explain how Charles Fairfield and I know each other and why his going still mattered. In 2007, Charles Fairfield was already a name in Georgia commercial real estate. He wasn't famous the way politicians are famous, but in the specific world of large-scale land and development, he was known. He built his firm on integrity and long relationships and an almost stubborn insistence on doing things slowly, which made him unusual in a business that rewards speed. I was at a municipal infrastructure meeting in Pooler because a parcel I owned was adjacent to a drainage project the county was proposing. The meeting was mostly engineers and local government people and a few developers. Charles was there for reasons I can't remember now. We ended up talking afterward in the parking lot of a Waffle House off I-16 for about 2 hours. He had questions about the land south of the port corridor, and I had answers because I'd been watching that land for 15 years and had the surveys to prove it. We didn't do a deal that day. What we did was something rarer. We had a real conversation. He wanted to know how I thought about land. I told him. He told me how he thought about risk. I listened. At the end of it, he gave me his card and said, "If you ever want to move something, call me first." I never called him because I moved things on my own timeline, but I filed his card. What he knew about me, sitting at that gala table in March, was that I was a man who'd quietly assembled and sold parcels in the Savannah corridor at moments that other people later called genius, but which I called patience. He knew I wasn't a handyman. He knew what kind of man I was, because he was a version of the same kind. Preston appeared at my elbow. He'd seen Charles sit down and come over with the instinct of a man who monitors important conversations from across a room. He put his hand on my shoulder, a proprietary gesture, the kind that says, "This one is mine," and said, "Charles, I see you've met Vivienne's father. Earl is. He does some property work. Small stuff. He's more of a hobbyist, really." He smiled when he said it, a friendly smile, the kind you use when you're saying something unkind while giving yourself plausible deniability. Charles Fairfield looked at Preston. Then he looked at me. I kept my face still. "A hobbyist," Charles said. Preston said. "He's got a little land down near Statesboro. Nothing major. More of a retirement thing." Charles was quiet for a moment. In that moment, I could hear the music from the band at the far end of the ballroom, and the clatter of dessert plates being cleared and someone laughing 2 tables over. Then Charles said, "Preston, how long have you been in commercial real estate?" Preston said, 11 years. Just about. Charles nodded slowly. "In 11 years, have you ever heard of the Hutchins parcels? The Pooler Corridor transaction in 2009? The Effingham County consolidation in 2013? Preston said. Those names are." He stopped. Charles said, "Your father-in-law does not do small stuff, Preston. Earl Hutchins is one of the reasons the South Savannah corridor developed the way it did. I've watched him work for 20 years. I tried to partner with him once, and he didn't need me." He paused. "I mean that as the highest compliment I know how to give." The dessert plates kept being cleared. The band kept playing. Preston's hand was still on my shoulder, but the weight of it had changed. It had become uncertain. It had become a hand that didn't know where to put itself. Vivienne had come over, I don't know when. She was standing just behind Preston's left side, and I could see on her face the expression of someone who has heard something that is rearranging itself inside her. Preston took his hand off my shoulder. He said, "I didn't realize Vivienne never mentioned." I said, "Vivienne doesn't know most of it. That's my doing, not hers." I said it calmly because I wasn't angry. I want to be honest about that. I was not sitting there enjoying Preston's discomfort the way a man enjoys a revenge. What I was feeling was something older and quieter than that. It was the feeling of something that had been carried a long time being set down, not dropped, just set down carefully on the table between us. Vivienne said, "Dad," just that. My name in her mouth the way she said it when she was 9 years old and had figured out that something wasn't what she thought it was. I said, "Let's sit down." We didn't stay long after that. Charles and I first talked for another 20 minutes about the market, about a corridor he was watching in coastal South Carolina, about the way tariffs were affecting material costs on the developments he had running. It was the kind of conversation I almost never get to have because almost nobody around me knows enough to have it. Preston stood nearby. He contributed nothing. I wasn't trying to humiliate him, and I want to be clear about that. But I also wasn't going to translate for him. He was a grown man and a vice president, and he could orient himself. In the car afterward, Vivian was quiet for a long time. I was driving. The Atlanta lights were behind us on 285, and she was looking out the passenger window, and I let the quiet be what it was. She said, "How much, Dad?" I said, "What do you mean?" She said, "You know what I mean." I told her a number, not the exact number, an approximate number, round enough to be honest, round enough to protect both of us. She said, "God." I said, "I know." She said, "Why didn't you tell me?" And this is the part I want to get right because I've thought about it every day since that night in the car on 285 with the city lights fading behind us. I said, because I watched what money did to people who got used to it before they understood it. I watched it make people careless. Not bad necessarily, just careless about what mattered. Your mother and I, we wanted you to know what things cost. We wanted you to build your own reason for getting up in the morning. I paused. I also didn't want you to marry someone who was marrying Earl Hutchins's net worth. She was quiet again. Then she said, "Is that what you think I did?" "With Preston?" I said, "I think Preston is a man who is very interested in his position in every room. I think you loved him before he knew what any of this meant, and that matters. What he does now matters more." She didn't say anything else for a while. When I dropped her at her house, she hugged me longer than she has since her mother died. I sat in the truck at the curb for a moment after she went inside, watching the lights in the front windows, and I thought about my father pressing his mill badge in the morning dark, and about the way he always ate his dinner at the same end of the table, in the same chair, and how nobody ever thought to ask him why. Preston called me 4 days later. It was a Monday. I was walking my morning route, and I let it go to voicemail, and then I listened to it on the porch afterward with my coffee. He said he wanted to talk. He said there were things he hadn't understood. He said he'd been doing some reading. I assume he'd looked up the Effingham County consolidation and a few other things Charles had mentioned, and that he realized he'd made some assumptions that weren't accurate. He said he'd like to come down to Statesboro, if I was open to it, and have a real conversation. He used the phrase, "a real conversation," and I sat with that for a moment. Because you don't use that phrase unless you know that what you've been having up until now wasn't one. I called him back. I said he was welcome to come down. I said I'd make coffee and we could sit on the porch and talk as long as he needed. I said one more thing, which was this, that I didn't need an apology, but I did need something to change, not for my sake, for Vivian's, because a woman can carry a long time for a man who doesn't see her, but she can't carry forever. He said, "I understand." I don't know if he did. I know that he came down the following Saturday. I know that we sat on my porch for 3 hours, and that at some point I walked him out to the back field and showed him the property line and explained a little about how I think about land. He asked questions. Real ones, not the kind you ask to seem interested. I answered them. Whether that's the beginning of something or just a single Saturday, I don't know yet. Some things you have to let develop at their own pace, like a piece of ground you bought and have to learn before you know what it wants to become. What I know is this. I have spent 64 years being the quiet man at the end of the table, in Jessup, at Georgia Southern, at the firm in Savannah, At every family dinner where Preston told stories about his deals and looked past me to make sure someone more important was listening, I was never invisible. I was patient. Those are not the same thing. My father taught me that, not with words. He didn't have many by the end. He taught it by the way he did his job for 41 years without needing anyone to acknowledge it, and by the way the mill sent flowers to his funeral and the plant manager cried in the second row. Because my father was the man who had quietly kept that plant from making 3 catastrophic decisions, and everyone knew it, and no one had ever said it to his face while he was alive to hear it. I don't want that for myself, or for Vivian, or even, if I'm honest, for Preston, because Preston is not a bad man. He is a man who was never taught to look carefully at what's in front of him. There's still time for that. The land teaches you patience. It teaches you that most things that matter are slow, and most things that are fast are just noise. The Biltmore Ballroom was noise. Charles Fairfield in that parking lot in Pooler in 2007 at 11 o'clock at night talking about how to read a drainage map, that was the real thing. The truck with 160,000 miles. The tuxedo from 1987. The 4 miles every morning in any weather. That's the real thing, too, if you're the man at the end of the table right now. The one people talk past, the one they describe to others in the smallest possible terms because it makes them feel larger. I am not going to tell you your moment is coming. I don't know your life. Maybe it comes, maybe it doesn't. What I know is what my father knew. The table doesn't define you. What you quietly built and why you built it and who you built it for. That's the whole story. Everything else is just seating arrangements. I've thought a lot about what Preston said that night. Not because it hurt, it didn't, not really, but because of how naturally it came out of him. A hobbyist. He didn't hesitate. He didn't lower his voice. He said it the way you say something you believe for so long it stopped feeling like an opinion and became a fact. That's the thing about how we see other people. We stop looking after a while. We take an early impression and we build a small box out of it and we put the person inside and we stop checking whether they still fit. Preston decided what I was in the first year of knowing me, and 11 years later he was still carrying that same decision around like it was current information. I don't say that to condemn him. I say it because I've done it too. We all have. The question is what you do when the box breaks open. What happened that night with Charles wasn't luck. Charles knew what I'd built because I'd built it carefully over decades, one decision at a time. I didn't get to that Biltmore Ballroom by accident. I got there by walking 4 miles every morning and reading every survey report that crossed my desk and sitting in a Waffle House parking lot at 11 at night with a man who asked good questions and deserved honest answers. The work came first. The moment in the ballroom was just the work becoming visible. That's the part people miss when they see a moment like that. They think it's about the reveal. It isn't. The reveal is just arithmetic. It's the sum of everything that came before it. The real story is the 20 years of ordinary days that nobody saw. The early mornings, the unglamorous meetings, the land you bought that your neighbors thought was worthless, the choices you made not because someone was watching, but because you knew they were right. Vivienne asked me on the drive home why I'd never told her. I gave her the honest answer. But there's a piece of it I didn't say, because I was still working it out myself. The fuller truth is this. I kept it quiet because I wanted to know who I was without it. The money, the acreage, the transactions, those are outcomes. They're not character. I wanted to build the character first and let the outcomes follow, not the other way around. My father did the same thing. He never told anyone at that mill how many times he'd saved them from a bad decision. He just made the right call and moved on. The work was its own justification. That's what I'd want anyone to take from this. Not that quiet people are secretly rich. Not that patience always pays off in a ballroom in front of the right audience. Some of the most honest, most careful, most genuinely intelligent people I've ever known never had a Charles Fairfield moment. They just did good work and went home. What I'd say is this: the integrity of what you build matters more than who sees you build it. Do the work because the work is worth doing. Develop your mind because a sharp mind is its own reward, not just a tool for getting ahead. Stand up straight in the rooms where nobody knows your name. And if someone puts you in a small box, a hobbyist, a handyman, a man at the end of the table, don't waste your energy arguing. Just keep building. The boxes have a way of breaking on their own. Preston came to Statesboro the next Saturday. He asked real questions for the first time. That's all I ever wanted from him. Not deference, not an apology, just the willingness to look more carefully. It's not nothing. It might even be a start.